When the judge said Kody Brown's name out loud, the room shifted in a way no family meeting ever had. 4 women who once called themselves sister wives sat separated by empty benches, while the man who preached unity now faced questions he could no longer control. This wasn't about religion anymore. It was about favoritism, power, and the moment America stopped believing the story. Before this unfolds, answer one thing in the comments. When a family breaks, is it betrayal or survival? The courtroom didn't look dramatic at first glance. No shouting, no gasps. Just polished wood, muted lights, and a judge who had clearly done her homework. But for anyone who had watched Kody Brown build his plural family on television, this moment felt unreal. For years, viewers had seen family meetings in living rooms, backyards, and rented homes across different states. Today, the meeting place was a courthouse, and the audience was no longer cheering. It was listening carefully. Kody sat at the defense table alone. That detail mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. In the show, he was never alone. He was surrounded by wives, children, movement, noise, and authority. Here, there was none of that. Just him, a lawyer, and a stack of documents that reduced decades of our family culture into dates, bank records, and sworn statements. He kept his posture upright, the same way he did during tell-all episodes, but his eyes were tighter now, more alert, like he was bracing for something he couldn't redirect. Behind him, seated across the aisle and deliberately apart from each other, were the 4 women who had once defended him publicly. Mary sat closest to the aisle, hands folded, expression controlled but distant. Janelle leaned back slightly, arms crossed, eyes forward, calm in a way that suggested she had already made peace with her decision. Christine looked emotional but steady, the kind of expression someone wears when they've already cried all their tears at home. Robin sat furthest away, posture rigid, glancing between Kody and the judge as if she still believed this might somehow be resolved privately. The judge opened the session by clarifying something immediately. This was not a criminal trial. No one was here to prosecute beliefs or lifestyle choices. What the court was examining were patterns. Emotional, financial, and relational patterns that allegedly caused harm. That sentence alone landed hard. Because for years, any criticism of Kody's leadership had been dismissed as misunderstanding plural marriage. Today, misunderstanding was no longer an acceptable explanation. The plaintiff's attorney began with a simple timeline: early marriages, shared ideals, public exposure, relocation after relocation. Then, slowly, a shift. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She let the facts speak in a way the show never had time for. As the family grew more visible, the power dynamics became clearer. 1 legal marriage, 3 spiritual ones, 1 household receiving consistent resources, others being told to wait, adjust, sacrifice. Kody's lawyer pushed back quickly. He reminded the court that all parties were adults, that the wives chose this life, that discomfort does not equal abuse. Kody nodded subtly, as if relieved someone was finally saying the words he had relied on for years. Choice, consent, commitment. These were the pillars he had always stood on. But then came the first interruption from the bench. The judge asked whether choice remains equal when one partner controls finances, schedules, emotional access, and public narrative. The question wasn't aggressive, but it was precise. Kody shifted in his chair. For the first time since entering the room, he glanced back toward the women. None of them met his eyes. The attorney continued, explaining that the court would hear testimony not about polygamy itself, but about favoritism, emotional withdrawal as punishment, and the impact of unequal treatment over time. She stated plainly that the family seen on television did not reflect the lived experience described in sworn affidavits. That sentence lingered, because it suggested something dangerous for Kody, not just legal exposure, but reputational collapse. As the judge prepared to call the first witness, Christine's name appeared at the top of the list. A quiet ripple moved through the room. Christine exhaled slowly, stood up, and for a brief second looked directly at Kody. There was no anger in her face, just certainty, and that more than anything, seemed to unsettle him. And right before she took the stand, the judge said something that changed the direction of the entire case. This court will hear from every wife, whether they plan to speak or not. Christine walked to the witness stand slowly, not because she was unsure, but because she understood the weight of the moment. This wasn't a confessional. This wasn't a reunion couch. This was the first time her words would exist under oath. Stripped of editing, stripped of family pressure, stripped of Kody's interruptions. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The courtroom felt smaller the moment she did. She began by describing the early years, and her voice was steady at first. She talked about faith, about believing plural marriage was a calling, about entering the family with optimism and trust. She said she didn't feel tricked in the beginning. That detail mattered. It made everything that followed harder to dismiss. She explained how, at first, decisions were framed as group discussions. Family meetings felt real. Compromises felt mutual. And Kody, back then, felt present. But then the question shifted to time. Who spent it? Who didn't? Christine explained that affection slowly became selective. That rules applied differently, depending on the wife. That expressing unhappiness was labeled disloyal. She said the word loyalty came up more than love in later years. When the attorney asked her to explain what she meant, Christine paused. Not because she didn't know, but because she did. She described moments that never made it on camera. Nights when Kody wouldn't come home without explanation. Conversations where she was told her emotions were the problem, not the situation. Requests for equal time that were met with lectures about gratitude. She said she began to feel like she had to earn kindness by staying quiet. And the quieter she became, the less she existed. Kody's lawyer objected, saying this was subjective. Feelings, not facts. The judge allowed it anyway. Because patterns, she reminded the court, are built from repetition. Christine then explained how financial decisions mirrored emotional ones. Certain households were prioritized. Others were told to wait it out. She didn't accuse Kody of stealing. She accused him of choosing over and over without transparency. Kody shifted in his seat. His expression was tight now, defensive. He shook his head once when Christine said the word favoritism. But she didn't look at him. She looked straight ahead and continued. She explained that when Robin joined the family, everything changed. Not immediately, gradually. Like water boiling slowly enough that no one jumps out. More attention, more protection, more patience, less explanation. The attorney asked Christine why she stayed. The question landed hard. Christine answered honestly. She said she stayed because leaving meant being labeled a failure. Because she believed enduring pain was part of spiritual growth. Because she didn't want to break the family. Because she thought if she just tried harder, things would balance out again. She said the moment she realized that balance was never coming was the moment she stopped blaming herself. At this point, ask yourself this. How many years would you stay silent before realizing silence was the cause? Then came the question everyone was waiting for. The attorney asked Christine whether she felt emotionally coerced. The room went still. Christine took a breath and said yes. Not with threats, but with withdrawal. Not with force, but with neglect. She explained that love was conditional. And conditions were never written down, only enforced. The judge wrote something down at that moment, slowly, deliberately. Kody's lawyer began cross-examination aggressively. He asked Christine whether she had benefited from the family financially. She said yes. He asked whether she had agreed to the family structure. She said yes. He asked whether Kody had ever physically harmed her. She said no. The lawyer leaned in, as if that settled everything. But Christine didn't stop there. She added that harm doesn't always leave bruises, and the judge allowed it to stand. Then something unexpected happened. Before the defense could move on, Janelle shifted in her seat. Not enough to speak, just enough to be noticed. The judge looked at her for a brief moment, then back at Christine. The attorney asked one final question. Whether Christine believed the family image presented to the public matched the reality inside the marriage. Christine answered quietly, She said the cameras showed effort, not outcome. Intention, not impact. Christine stepped down from the stand, and for the first time since the trial began, Kody looked shaken. Not angry, not defiant, shaken. Because Christine hadn't attacked him. She hadn't exaggerated. She had simply described a life where love was rationed and silence was rewarded. And the court had listened. As Christine returned to her seat, the judge announced a short recess. Conversations buzzed softly. Papers shuffled. Kody leaned toward his lawyer, whispering urgently. And across the aisle, Janelle finally made eye contact with Christine and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. What no one said out loud was already clear. Christine's testimony wasn't the climax. It was the opening crack. And if Janelle spoke next, the story Kody had relied on for years was about to face something far more dangerous than anger. Janelle took the stand with a different energy than Christine. Where Christine carried emotion, Janelle carried structure. She sat upright, adjusted the microphone once, and spoke like someone who had already organized the story in her head. The courtroom noticed immediately. This wasn't about feelings first. This was about systems. And systems are harder to argue with. She began by explaining her role in the family as the practical one, the planner, the numbers person, the one who understood budgets, mortgages, taxes, and long-term stability. For years, she said, she believed her contribution balanced the family. She earned consistently. She handled logistics. She trusted that fairness existed somewhere above her pay grade. And for a long time, that trust went unquestioned, until the math stopped making sense. The attorney asked her to explain. Janelle didn't hesitate. She described how income flowed into shared accounts, how decisions about property were framed as collective, and how promises were made during family meetings that were later quietly revised. She explained how certain expenses were approved immediately, while others were delayed indefinitely, how moving plans were justified spiritually, but executed financially in ways that favored one household again and again. Kody's lawyer objected, calling it interpretation. The judge overruled and asked Janelle to continue. Janelle explained that interpretation ends where records begin. She referenced bank statements, purchase agreements, and timelines. She spoke calmly, without accusation, and that calm made the room tense. Because what she was describing wasn't chaos. It was consistency, a pattern repeated often enough to become policy. She explained that when questions were raised, they were reframed as a lack of faith. When concerns were pushed, they were labeled divisive. And when she asked for clarity, she was told clarity would come later. Later, she said, never arrived. Instead, what arrived were new rules, new expectations, and a growing gap between what was promised and what was delivered. Kody watched her closely now. This wasn't a wife expressing pain. This was a partner describing imbalance with receipts. His lawyer tried to regain ground by asking whether Janelle had ever personally signed off on decisions. She answered yes, and explained that consent without full information isn't partnership. The judge leaned forward slightly at that sentence. Janelle then described the moment her perspective shifted permanently. It wasn't during an argument. It wasn't during a move. It was when she realized her children were being asked to sacrifice stability while watching another household receive protection without question. She said that was the moment loyalty stopped feeling virtuous and started feeling irresponsible. Her voice stayed level, but the words hit harder than anything before them. Right here, pause and think, when does loyalty turn into self-erasure? And who benefits from that silence? The defense tried to suggest that unequal outcomes don't prove unequal intent. Janelle responded simply, intent doesn't erase impact. Years of imbalance don't disappear because the original idea was good. The courtroom felt tight now. Even the shuffling stopped. The judge asked whether Janelle believed the family could have been repaired. Janelle said yes, if accountability had come before resentment. But accountability never came. Then the judge asked the question no one expected. She asked Janelle whether she believed the public portrayal of the family created pressure to maintain a version of reality that no longer existed. Janelle paused and then answered honestly. She said the show became a shield. Problems were postponed, truth was edited, and admitting failure felt impossible when millions were watching. That answer shifted something fundamental. Because now, the courtroom wasn't just examining a marriage, it was examining performance. The gap between what was shown and what was lived. Kody's lawyer stood again, visibly frustrated, and tried to reassert control. He suggested Janelle was resentful because she didn't receive emotional validation. Janelle corrected him gently. She said she was resentful because systems that punish honesty eventually collapse. When Janelle stepped down, the air felt heavier than before. Two wives had spoken, two stories, different tones, same conclusion. Kody no longer looked defiant, he looked cornered. And then the judge did something unexpected. She announced that before the next witness, the court would review the legal status of each marriage and the implications that followed. Robin's shoulders tensed immediately. Mary looked down. Kody exhaled sharply. Because the next phase of the trial wasn't about emotion or money anymore. The courtroom settled into a different kind of silence when the judge announced that the next phase would focus on legal standing. This wasn't emotional anymore. It wasn't even moral. It was structural. Papers were passed forward, exhibits marked, and a quiet understanding moved through the room that whatever came next would not be undone by explanations or intentions. The judge began by laying out the facts plainly. Out of 4 marriages, only one carried full legal recognition for most of the family's public life. The others existed spiritually, privately, emotionally, but not on paper. She didn't accuse. She didn't editorialize. She simply stated it, and that distinction landed like a weight no one could shift. Mary was called first, not to testify at length, but to clarify the timeline. She spoke softly, almost detached, explaining how she had once been the legal wife, how that status changed, and how she had agreed to it, believing it served the family. She said she thought sacrifice meant strength, that letting go meant growth. The judge asked if she had understood the long-term consequences at the time. Mary hesitated. That hesitation echoed louder than her words. Robin was next. The room felt different the moment her name was spoken. She approached the stand carefully, visibly emotional, already bracing for judgment. She spoke about joining the family later, about wanting stability for her children, about never intending to replace anyone. Her voice cracked when she said she felt blamed for choices she didn't make alone. For a moment, the courtroom softened. Even the judge's expression shifted slightly. Then the questions became precise. About legal protections, about asset ownership, about whose names appeared on documents and whose didn't. Robin answered truthfully, but each answer carved the reality deeper. One wife had legal security. 3 did not. One household had guaranteed protection. 3 relied on promises. And those promises, as the court had already established, changed over time. Kody finally took the stand. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, but it didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived quietly. He spoke confidently at first, repeating phrases familiar to anyone who had watched him for years. Family culture, shared values, mutual consent. He said he never intended to harm anyone. He said leadership required difficult decisions. He said plural marriage was misunderstood by outsiders. The judge let him speak. Then she asked a question that stripped the speech down to its core. She asked whether leadership also required equal accountability. Kody paused. He said accountability existed within the family, not outside it. The judge nodded slowly, then asked whether that internal accountability had ever applied to him. The pause this time was longer. Kody defended his choices by saying someone had to lead. That indecision would have destroyed the family. That favoritism was perception, not fact. He insisted he loved all his wives equally, even if he expressed it differently. The judge didn't argue. She asked whether unequal outcomes can exist without unequal power. Kody shifted in his seat. This is the moment everything changes. Because love can be debated, but power always leaves a trail. The courtroom reviewed documents next, property agreements, mortgage records, legal filings. Dates lined up in ways no one could ignore. Decisions made unilaterally. Consequences absorbed unevenly. The judge didn't accuse Kody of malice. She didn't need to. She pointed out that systems don't require bad intentions to cause harm, only imbalance and lack of correction. When Kody stepped down, he no longer looked defensive. He looked exposed, not as a villain, not as a hero, but as someone who had built a structure that only worked when no one questioned it. The judge announced that the court would now consider remedies, not punishment, remedies, financial adjustments, acknowledgement of harm, legal clarity going forward. As the session adjourned, the wives didn't look at each other. They didn't look at Kody either. They looked ahead. Because for the first time, the story wasn't about saving the family image. It was about deciding what accountability looked like after the cameras stopped. The final session began without ceremony. No one stood dramatically. No one rushed to speak. The courtroom felt tired in the way people do after telling the truth for too long without knowing what it will cost them. The judge returned to the bench, looked at each person once, and made it clear this wasn't about choosing sides anymore. It was about closing something that had been left open for decades. She summarized what the court had heard, slowly and carefully. Testimony about emotional withdrawal used as discipline. Financial patterns that favored one household over others. Legal protections applied unevenly. Public narratives masking private imbalance. She reminded everyone that this court could not undo the past, but it could acknowledge harm and prevent it from being repeated under the excuse of belief or family structure. Then she addressed the women directly. She spoke to Christine about the courage it takes to leave a system that tells you endurance equals virtue. She spoke to Janelle about the burden of carrying responsibility without authority. She spoke to Mary about sacrifice made without full understanding. And finally, she spoke to Robin, not accusing but clarifying, that benefit does not automatically equal blame, but awareness carries responsibility going forward. Kody stood when asked. His voice was quieter now. He said he never intended to hurt anyone, that he believed he was holding the family together the only way he knew how. That pressure came from every direction: faith, public scrutiny, expectations. The judge didn't interrupt. When he finished, she asked one final question. She asked whether, knowing what he knew now, he would have done anything differently. Kody didn't answer immediately, and that silence said more than certainty ever could. Here's the truth no one can avoid. Intent explains behavior, but it does not erase damage. The ruling itself wasn't explosive. There were no gasps and no cheers. The court ordered financial separation, formal recognition of contributions made by each wife, and a written acknowledgement of unequal treatment. It wasn't punishment, it was record. And sometimes, being written into record is the most permanent consequence of all. As people gathered their things, the energy in the room shifted. Not relief, not victory, just finality. Christine left first, shoulders lighter than when she arrived. Janelle followed, composed but resolved. Mary paused at the door, looking back once, not at Kody, but at the bench, as if committing the moment to memory. Robin lingered, torn between comfort and consequence, realizing that silence would no longer protect anyone. Kody was the last to leave. He stood alone for a moment, longer than necessary, staring at the space where his family had once sat together. No cameras, no applause, just the quiet aftermath of accountability. And outside the courthouse, life didn't pause. People walked by without recognizing them. Cars passed. The world moved on. But for those who lived inside that family, everything had changed. Not because a judge ordered it, but because the truth had finally been spoken out loud.